Today is Thursday, January 21st. It's about 11:30 in the morning. This recording is about scenarioing, as in being in or creating a scenario in your mind vis-a-vis being bipolar 1, mental illness, inappropriately described, but that's the way it is for now. I've covered that in another video. Scenario is a function in the brain, and everybody uses it to some extent or another, even during every day, where you carry on a conversation you're going to have with someone, or you had with someone in your mind, and you just carry it on, and at some point it reaches a conclusion or an end, or for some reason you go on to something else. But it may be you're going to give a presentation and you go over that, or you may be going over an idea that came to mind, maybe an invention or a piece of poetry or whatever, and you go over that. Well, this is all well and good. However, when you're bipolar 1, there are certain things that stand out when these symptoms become more prominent. And one of them is doing a lot of work, for not necessarily physical, but concentrated, focusing on accomplishing things. It could be writing, figuring things out, mental, emotional, situational situations that need to be resolved, writing up papers or reports, or doing other kinds of things. And this is all well and good, and it's in fact, of course, necessary in everybody's life to some extent or another, and in some form or another. But what happens with can happen with a bipolar 1 is that one will lose sight of the amount of work one's doing and become kind of like a short-term workaholic. And the intensity, even in one day, and maybe going into the evening, into the night, maybe it might happen for a day or 2 days or more on end. Of course, this is, while it is productive and produces good results, if this function is overworked, as with anything in the body, muscles, mind, emotions, whatever, it will get tired. It needs to be replenished with resources, give it time to rest and restore its healthy functioning and ability to function, and restore its resiliency, and as you know, all kinds of things. And so if that doesn't happen, this can interrupt sleep until you lose sleep, and so this makes things worse. And it kind of goes into begins to you're losing your balance, and you may have to get some help with a hospital and medication, or some counseling. But with a bipolar 1, this is a significant problem if it goes too far. And I've experienced this. I am one of the worst Achilles heels that I have, being bipolar 1, is working too bloody hard, and it is so hard not to. I mean, there's somebody said the phrase chasing a high, and that's what it's part of called manic mania, part of mania. A lot of people say mania, but they don't really realize that it's like saying somebody has the flu. It doesn't tell you what kind of flu. It doesn't tell you what the symptoms are, whether they're in bed, ambulatory, or, anything about it. Temperature, nothing about it. But people say, a lot of people, somebody say, oh, they've got the flu. That's why they're not at work today. And they'll let it go, but they don't actually know. There's no doctor that would prescribe any treatment of any kind on that diagnosis. If somebody called him on the phone, what should I do, doc? I have the flu. He says, well, go take such and such and acromegaline, 14, what happened? 4 milligrams. He's not going to do that. And yet people use this mania and think they've described something. And they've described virtually nothing that's useful to somebody like me who knows the ins and outs of the various symptoms and the characteristics. You see, there's nothing wrong with having an interest in spending money. Everybody does that all the time. I mean, some people mortgage their houses and borrow from all their friends, and their business goes bankrupt, and they don't say, well, God, he's mentally ill. But if you've got bipolar 1 and you spend $100, and it's not for a productive means, returns, people are going to raise their eyebrows. Your therapist is going to say, well, okay, well, we're going to pay attention to this one. Well, bugger off, fella. Because, this is a natural thing. If it gets out of hand, now that's something different. But there's a continuum in all these symptoms, whether they are, because in the initial stages, 50-60% along the way, they're entirely productive and healthy. It's just with bipolar 1, people can go pretty easily too far if you augment it. Or, you see, if you have if you're, for instance, take the thing, if you're productive, you're being a little overproductive, and it's kind of tipping your boat over a little bit, and what you're doing is you're overusing the function of scenario, and I call it scenarioing. I don't know how to make a verb out of it, noun out of it, but that's, you see, and so if you scenario too much, you are just overworking, and it's making matters worse for you overall, even though it's just one tiny bit of a symptoms. The symptoms that are there, could be there, it undermines the whole thing. Primarily you get into loss of sleep and other things. That's when it gets very difficult. And you may end up having to get medication and such. You get maybe hospitalized to getting your balance back. But going into scenarioing is a conscious thing. And if you do scenario, normally there'd be good results from it, and you would feel emotionally and mentally, intellectually rewarded for having accomplished or solved whatever you did in your scenarioing. But there comes a time when it's too much, and this business of scenarioing gives you a net loss. It's like eating cotton candy is wonderful for the first couple of bites, but if you have to eat the whole bloody cone, you're going to be, your system is not going to like it. And that's about scenarioing. For people who do the scenarioing, and it's overworked. There's just one example of a particular function of the brain in all these symptoms for bipolar 1, how it can get overworked and how it contributes if you augment it, if you willfully and deliberately scenario and you haven't gotten your rest, so it's getting restored every night, you're just exacerbating your problems. And so you have to make a conscious disruption of getting involved in scenarioing unless it's absolutely necessary. You got an appointment coming up with a doctor and you got to put things order in your mind and that kind of stuff, and then it's necessary to spend some energy with that particular function. But otherwise, if you have a function that needs to be rested, you've got to consciously circumvent and sidestep the use of that function. You can use other functions, but anyway, so that's just a little bit about a overuse of a function when one is bipolar, and it's a lot of people say that it's a dysfunction. Well, yeah, if you're overusing it, that's a dysfunction, but you've got to realize the very positive and valuable aspects that happen with a person with bipolar. And they're very valuable, and you, in fact, do far more work than a person without bipolar can possibly do. The stuff that I accomplished, a quote, person without simply can't compete. They simply can't compete. But I can't hold a job because the nature of my bipolar is that I like to think about and solve all kinds of problems, but according to what my mind wants to focus on. If I'm at a job 8 to 5, my boss is going to say, I want you to solve such and such a problem, put such a body pulse, and my whole being is going to be, sorry sir, but I'm out of here. I want to think about solving such and such a salt vaccine exam, whatever. You see, so I'm working on significant things when I want to, and nobody can stop me from thinking about anything I want to whenever I want to. Of course, there are no walls around Jerusalem, regardless of the appearance. A lot of people think there are, and they act as though there are walls around Jerusalem, and they'll show me photographs. And I go, well, you missed the point. But apparently there is a wall around Jerusalem as far as you're concerned, and I acknowledge that. So why don't you find somebody else to talk to? You see what I mean? The valuable use and prudent use of the heightened use of these faculties that are indicated in these symptoms the valuable is so much greater than a normal person can conceive. A good example is that in war they'll take people with color blindness, certain color blindnesses, for instance, flying over the desert or everything, and they'll fly these guys or men and women over the terrain, and because of their color blindness and the way they process the light waves, they can see all these supposedly camouflaged guns and camps and all kinds of stuff, whereas the pilot sitting next to them can't see a thing. And this is an example of the prudent use and use of this capacity. Yes, it is detrimental, clearly, if it's gone too far, and one has to be careful of that. But another example is say marble, and the very famous white quarry marble in, I think it's Italy, the world famous one that's been around for hundreds of years. When people go to choose marble there, the architects and designers go to choose the very pieces of marble that they want to see and use in their installations. They don't look for pure white marble as the most valuable. They look for marble that is veined in certain ways. Not any vein patterns, but certain patterns, according to the aesthetics in their eye. It's another way of looking at things, and it's a valuable way, and it contributes to everybody's sense of well-being when they walk through a room that has this marble installed in it. Just like a oriental carpet. You know, it's not perfect like a machine carpet, and yet it is so much more valuable in other ways that a machine carpet is just like nobody would buy a machine carpet if they could afford an oriental carpet, hand knotted. But mental illness presently is there's such amount of ignorance and popular misconception and misinformation, and people think they know enough about it, and so they don't even think that they don't know enough, and to look further into it. It's just somebody has a mental illness, somebody is bipolar, all of a sudden nothing they could do or say could possibly be of any use to anybody. And that's how people feel. But you've got to realize with somebody who clearly is bipolar 1 that you guys are the ones, as far as I'm concerned, are at a severe disadvantage, and there's no way that you can possibly compete with me in the areas that I have these strengths. You regard them as weaknesses. I'm sorry. Just from an objective point of view, to begin with, you don't even make it on the court for competition. I don't even think you have any ability to compete with me. And I know he's bipolar, he's got grandiose ideas. See what I mean? All I can say is, yeah, I understand. I understand. It's not the first time somebody thought that and was wrong. Or was right. Maybe it is a grandiose idea. But maybe it's right, too. And the thing about it is, you're not going to check it out. But I am. You see the disadvantage that you have just at the get-go? I'm going to be prepared. And you are not. And you are not, furthermore, even going to consider that it was a shortcoming on your part. If you accept popular opinion or assumptions, and you swallow those hook, line, and sinker, well, you're going to end up being filleted on the fisherman's table.